What happens when a helpless orphan bear cub wanders into unfamiliar territory, and straight into the den of a mother who already has her paws full? Deep within the ancient pines of Alaska, nature is often cruel, quick, and unforgiving. When a tiny trembling cub is left alone after a tragic accident takes his mother, the forest becomes a terrifying place. Cold nights, growling predators, and no one to turn to. But what if survival came from the most unexpected place? This isn't the story of a cub rescued by humans. It's the story of something even rarer, something raw and real, the natural instinct of compassion between animals. A mother bear, already caring for her own 2 cubs, encounters the orphan. She should have driven him off. Nature says, protect your own. But this bear didn't follow nature's script. She let him stay. She fed him when he was too weak to forage. She guarded him as if he'd been born from her own womb. And in doing so, she changed the laws of the wild, if only for a moment. Why did she do it? Did she sense his pain? Or did she simply refuse to let the forest take another life? This is the breathtaking story of a found family in the wilderness, a tale of love that knows no blood, and a cub who learned to be strong, not alone, but as part of a family he never expected to find. You won't believe what happened when the orphan cub met her Rayall cubs, and how their bond would one day defy even the harshest winter. The sun had barely risen above the treetops when the cry echoed through the forest, not the roar of a predator, not the call of a bird, but the desperate, trembling squeal of a cub too young to be alone. Nestled between ferns and the gnarled roots of a fallen spruce, the tiny bear huddled against the cold ground. His fur was soaked with morning dew. His paws, raw and bleeding. His eyes, wild with fear. He didn't understand why his mother hadn't returned. Hours earlier, a thunderous rockslide had torn down the northern slope. The cub had been trailing behind, learning to walk the forest paths with clumsy steps. When he'd looked up, she was gone. Buried. Vanished. Silenced by the mountains that raised them. He waited. 4 hours. Then stumbled downhill. Crying out over and over again, hoping the forest would bring her back. But only the wind answered. 2 days passed. The cub, barely 3 months old, hadn't eaten. He'd chewed bark, sniffed rotten berries, licked the stream until his belly ached. But nothing could stop the trembling. Wolves passed nearby one night. He'd hidden beneath a hollow log, barely breathing as their snarls echoed just feet away. His heartbeat thumped like a drum in his tiny chest. Every instinct told him to lie low. Stay still. Don't cry. But instincts were hard to follow when you're alone. On the 3rd morning, his legs gave out. He curled beneath a bush, closed his eyes, and waited for the cold to take him. Until a rustle. Heavy. Slow. Purposeful. He wasn't alone anymore. From the shadows emerged a large female grizzly, towering broad-shouldered, her fur speckled with silver and leaves. Her nose twitched, catching the cub's scent. Behind her waddled 2 healthy cubs, older, rounder, confident. They climbed over roots and rocks without hesitation. The orphan opened his eyes weakly, too tired to move, too afraid to cry. The mother bear lowered her head. Sniffed. Growled, but not in anger. A low, questioning sound. A sound meant for understanding. Her cubs approached, curious. One poked the stranger with a paw. The other batted at his ear. He didn't respond. Just blinked. Waiting. The mother stepped closer. Then, without warning, she licked his face. Once. Gently. That night, the orphan cub lay in a new den, still trembling, still uncertain, but not alone. The mother bear hadn't pushed him away. She hadn't attacked him or turned cold. She had simply allowed him. Allowed him to walk behind her. To sleep near her other cubs. To eat berries from the patch she overturned. He didn't understand why. But he clung to it. Because even without knowing the words for it, he understood that he'd been chosen. Not by blood, but by something deeper. The mother bear, who had no name in the world of men, was known among rangers as Sierra, a fiercely protective matriarch who had successfully raised 2 litters before. She wasn't known for being gentle. But this time, something shifted. Sierra's 2 cubs, one male, one female, were robust, playful, and bonded tightly. They didn't understand what this 3rd cub was or why he followed their mother. He didn't smell like them. didn't wrestle like them, didn't even make the same chirping sounds. But he followed. Always behind. Always watching. And Sierra let him. Not just let, she began to treat him like her own. She grunted when she moved. He followed. She foraged. He ate. She growled at the sky during lightning storms. He tucked his head under her side. The other cubs resisted at first. But something in Sierra's presence kept them from pushing him out. She had decided. He was family. Being accepted didn't mean being equal. The orphan cub, now dubbed Echo by a ranger who glimpsed him briefly on a trail cam, had to earn his place. The other two cubs challenged him constantly. They'd knock him over during berry foraging, block him from the best tree stumps filled with grubs, race him to watering holes and leave him far behind. Echo never fought back. Not yet. But he learned. He learned how to move in silence, how to snatch fallen fish from the riverbank without making a splash, how to find mushrooms the others missed. And over time, his weakness became instinct. His fear became focus. And his silence? It became his greatest strength. One night, a large male bear wandered into Sierra's territory, likely seeking mates, or worse, easy prey. The cubs were asleep under a fallen cedar. Echo was the first to stir. He smelled the stranger before he heard him, that sharp metallic scent of another dominant male. His heart raced. He whimpered, waking the others. The large male bear loomed near the edge of the clearing. But then, Sierra stood. Massive. Unshaken. Furious. She charged before the stranger could approach. A deafening roar erupted through the trees. The male fled. Sierra returned minutes later, breathing heavy, her face scratched, her shoulder bleeding slightly. She lay beside the cubs and pulled them close, including Echo. No difference. No hesitation. All three were hers. Over the next weeks, something changed. The female cub, once aloof toward Echo, began sharing her pinecone stash. The male cub started nudging Echo playfully, testing him, challenging him. Echo didn't win every wrestling match. But he no longer backed down. He had learned to stand. To growl. To rise. He was still smaller. Still quieter. But not alone. Not anymore. The days grew shorter. The crisp bite of fall wrapped around the mountains like a tightening rope. Trees shed their leaves. Streams slowed. The wind whispered warnings of the coming frost. And Sierra knew it was time to prepare the den. She led her cubs across familiar territory, sniffing out the place she had chosen long ago, a hollow beneath a massive fir, insulated by roots, tucked into the slope of a sun-kissed ridge. This would be home for the long, hard winter. All three cubs followed her without hesitation. But for Echo, this would be his first true hibernation with a family. No longer shivering alone under bushes. No longer watching the stars alone. This time, he'd sleep surrounded by warmth. Inside the den, the scent of pine and earth settled into their fur. Sierra curled her massive body around the cubs. The two siblings nestled close, as they always had. Echo hesitated at first, but Sierra lifted a paw, pulled him inward, and rested her head beside his. The heartbeat that had once comforted her own cubs now comforted him. And in the stillness of the den, with wind howling softly beyond the moss-stuffed entrance, the once orphaned cub closed his eyes, and dreamed in safety for the very first time. Outside, snow began to fall. And inside, a new family slept in rhythm. During that deep winter sleep, Echo dreamt. Of his mother's scent, fleeting now, like smoke on the wind. Of the days he'd waited alone, forgotten, crying. But in those dreams, something new began to replace the sorrow. The low hum of Sierra's breathing beside him. The weight of another cub's paw resting against his back. A warmth that was no longer borrowed, but his. It wasn't about replacing what was lost. It was about discovering what could still be found. When spring finally arrived, the world cracked open again. Melting snow turned into rivulets. New shoots pushed through thawing ground. And the den, once silent, stirred with life. Sierra emerged first, cautious, slow, alert. Then came the cubs, slightly bigger, their fur thicker, their legs steadier. Echo blinked in the sunlight, dazed. But his gaze didn't go to the forest first. It went to Sierra. And when she grunted and led the way down the slope, he followed, without hesitation. He was no longer the outsider. He was part of the rhythm now. The forest had changed. What was once a playground of pine cones and mushrooms had become a proving ground. The cubs were no longer fragile things tumbling in wildflowers. They were bigger, leaner, and more curious than ever. Especially Echo. He watched birds with sharp eyes. He listened to distant howls and memorized paths through the thickest bramble. Every lesson Sierra taught, how to climb, fish, defend, Echo took in like gospel. But he still trailed behind her sometimes. Not out of fear, but respect. She had given him life again, and he would not waste it. It happened on a morning thick with fog. Sierra led the cubs to the river. The sound of rushing water filled the air, and fish flickered beneath the surface like silver arrows. Her cubs lunged in, as they'd been taught. They missed, tumbled, laughed. Echo stood still. Focused. Waited. He saw one, fat and slow, gliding upstream. With a sudden swipe, he lashed down and hooked it. The fish flopped on the rocks. Sierra looked up, her dark eyes watching. She didn't make a sound. But Echo saw her nod, just once, before turning back to the river. And it meant everything. Later that summer, a scent returned on the wind. Familiar. Menacing. The same male bear Sierra had driven off nearly a year before had returned. Larger now, hungrier, and more desperate. This time, he didn't stay at the edges. He charged into Sierra's foraging ground. The cubs scattered. Sierra roared. Teeth met claws. Blood splattered ferns. Echo didn't run. He circled wide, watching, and when the male bear turned toward one of the other cubs, Echo leapt from a ledge, landing on the attacker's back and sinking his tiny teeth into its shoulder. It was reckless. Foolish. Brave. Long enough for Sierra to recover and drive the threat away. The male limped off into the trees, growling. And Sierra turned to Echo, panting, bleeding, trembling. But her eyes weren't angry. They were wide, proud. Echo had defended his family. A few weeks later, as fall crept back into the valley, the three cubs found a massive cedar, long used by bears as a marking tree. Deep claw marks ran along its trunk. Messages of dominance, warning, identity. The siblings took turns clawing the bark. Echo watched. Then, with quiet certainty, he stood on his hind legs and raked his claws down the wood. Not the highest. Not the deepest. But his own. He had earned it. He was no longer the orphan. He was one of them. The second summer came and went like a dream. The three cubs, now strong adolescents, roamed farther than before. Their games turned into sparring matches. Their foraging into silent cooperation. They knew each other's strengths. Their rhythm needed no language. But the forest whispered something new. Change. Sierra began showing signs. She no longer waited as long at watering holes. Her signals became firmer. Shorter. Less indulgent. Nature was preparing them. Because cubs grow up. And bears do not stay in family units forever. Even love cannot hold back instinct. One morning, Sierra stood at the edge of a clearing, gazing at the ridge beyond. She grunted. Her cubs gathered. She led them down an unfamiliar path, one they had never taken before, through gnarled trees and dense underbrush. The world felt heavier, quieter. At the base of a tall hill, she stopped. She licked each cub once, pressing her forehead to theirs. When she reached Echo, she hesitated just a second longer. His breath caught in his throat. And then, she turned. And walked away. Not with hesitation. With purpose. And didn't look back. The forest felt colder. The two siblings remained by Echo's side. For a while. But the bond between them was weakening. Nature had begun its pull. One left in early autumn, the brother, following a scent trail too strong to resist. The sister stayed longer. They hunted, climbed, and slept together, often curling against one another at night. But when the first frost came, she too wandered off, drawn by instinct, no longer tethered by childhood bonds. Echo woke one morning, and she was gone. He was alone again. But this time, it didn't break him. This time, he stood tall. Echo returned to the old den once more before winter. The pine needles had fallen, the entrance half collapsed. But inside, the scent lingered, earth fur warmth, family. He sat there for hours, watching the wind move the branches. And then he did something remarkable. He found the old cedar, the one with claw marks, and carved deeper. His mark. Bolder now. A declaration not of belonging, but of becoming. The forest had not made him weak. It had made him something more. Not an orphan. Not just a survivor. But a bear of his own story. Winter returned to the valley, fierce and merciless. Echo found shelter high up the ridge, in a crevice between two ancient boulders. It wasn't the warm den of his childhood, it was smaller, colder, quieter. But it was his. He curled into the space as snow blanketed the world outside, his breath slow and steady. In the silence, he remembered. Sierra's heavy breathing beside him. The rumble of cubs wrestling in sleep. The warmth of a family that had chosen him. Now he slept alone, not because he was abandoned, but because he was ready. When the snow melted and light returned, Echo emerged a different bear. Taller. Stronger. Wiser. He walked the forest paths not with fear, but familiarity. Every stump, every fallen tree, every stream bend held a memory. Some painful. Some powerful. But all part of him. He fished with precision. Climbed like a shadow. Moved through the forest like he belonged. Because he did. He didn't need to prove himself anymore. This was his land now, too. One golden afternoon, Echo reached the top of a ridge overlooking the valley, a spot he hadn't visited since his earliest days. He paused. And there below, near a berry thicket, he saw her. Sierra. Older. Grayer. But unmistakably her. She was resting by a fallen log, alone now, her last litter likely gone, as all cubs eventually go. Echo didn't rush toward her. He walked down the slope slowly. She raised her head. They locked eyes. She didn't move. Didn't growl. And when he reached her, she pressed her massive head against his, the same way she had years ago when he was trembling and half-starved. No words. Just recognition. She remembered. They lay together until dusk. Then Sierra stood, gave one last look, and wandered back into the trees. Echo didn't follow. He didn't need to. Their journey had come full circle. That night, he found another marking tree. Tall. Untouched. He stood tall and marked it. This time, not to be accepted, but to leave a message behind. A story in scratches. Of a cub who had no family. Until one found him. And of a bear who was no longer lost. But home. In the wild, survival is everything, and yet, against the odds, one mother bear chose compassion over instinct. She accepted a stranger's cub as her own, not because it benefited her, but because something deep within her recognized a soul in need. This story reminds us that family is not defined by blood, but by love, protection, and the willingness to stand together in the face of the world. Even in the wilderness, where nature seems ruled by law and dominance, kindness can emerge in its purest form. And when it does, it doesn't just change the life of the one rescued. It creates a legacy. Love doesn't ask where you came from, it simply asks, will you stay? Even in nature, where survival reigns supreme, compassion can rewrite fate.